These threads are being dyed with natural indigo. While this used to be the only way you could dye clothes this color, it's becoming a rarer and rarer sight. The invention of synthetic indigo meant the natural stuff was nearly bleached from existence. Within a couple of decades, global production of the plant-based dye had dropped 90%. The multi-billion-dollar fashion industry of today relies on cheap synthetic indigo made with toxic chemicals, which can pollute waterways and threaten animal and human health. Now, some people are looking to increase production of natural indigo as a more sustainable option and a way to keep the art form alive. But natural indigo has its own environmental costs. So which version will permanently dye the fashion industry? And can the art of natural indigo dyeing stand the test of time? For centuries, natural indigo was a lucrative industry in Japan's Tokushima Prefecture. Originally reserved for the upper class, the dye eventually became so widespread it was dubbed Japan Blue. But once synthetic alternatives came on the scene in 1897, it only took a couple decades to wipe natural indigo almost completely off the map. Kenta Watanabe is one of a handful of producers still growing and dyeing with the plant today.
なんかもう仕事っていう感覚よりも本当にこう人生かけたライフワークっていう形のイメージの方がすごい強くて、生活の一部なんですけど。
Watanabe's indigo dye is called Tsukumo, a product unique to this area of Japan. Unlike most fabric dyes, indigo is not soluble in water. So producers must first process the leaves into something that can dissolve before they can use it to dye clothes. Natural materials like cotton, linen, or wood absorb dye best.
これは私のハット。
But Kenta has been known to get creative.
なんすかね。めちゃめちゃでかいスピーカーとか、サウンドスピーカー、ものすごい大きいサウンドスピーカーを染めたのがとっても印象的でしたね。なんかあんだけでかいものをこうガバッと染めるっていうのもこう不思議な感覚だったので。
He says dyeing should be done slowly and in layers.
だから言ったらね、なんだろう、お化粧する時のファンデーションみたいな下地がちゃんとできてないとこの上に美しく乗る藍色も力を発揮できないというか。
Most of the world separates the indigo pigment from the plant, forming a powder or compressed puck. But Tsukumo uses whole leaves.
こうやってね、酸化する前は黄色いんですよ。これをしっかりこう空気に触れて空気と反応させることで青に変わっていきます。
Fermentation is necessary to change the water-insoluble indigo molecule into its water-soluble form, leucoindigo. In this form, the dye can penetrate fabric, but once it's exposed to oxygen, it reverts back to indigo, making the color permanent. Late in the year, when the temperature cools down, Kenta and his team spread out bags of dried indigo on a dirt floor and pile them up. They sprinkle the pile with water, a necessary ingredient to fuel fermentation.
乾いたら発酵が止まります。
Fermentation is necessary in most methods of natural indigo production and usually takes 3 to 4 days. This pile of wet leaves will ferment for 120. Once a week, the team shakes things up. If the bacteria are alive and well, the pile should be wet, hot, and smelly.
感じます。一番ピーク時はだいたい75度。ものすごいこうツンとする刺激臭ですね。アンモニア臭がします。
After 4 months, Kenta bags the leaves and lets them rest for 6 months as they undergo another round of fermentation. The amount of fermentation time is a balancing act.
染色液に仕込むときに色がきれいに立ち上がってきません。長く発酵しすぎると単純にそのすくもの全体量がどんどん減っていってしまいますので、
Composting them this way results in a dye vat like this one that can be used much longer than ones made with quick fermentation methods, as long as it's properly cared for. A vat of Tsukumo dye is a living thing. The bacteria inside aid fermentation and consume oxygen in the dye solution, keeping the yellow leuco-indigo from turning blue before the time is right. Part of Shinya's job is teaching customers how to raise a vat.
で、ただこの最初も、赤ちゃん育てるみたいな感じで、こう成長とともに濃い色を出してくれてるの人間みたいなんですけど。
Shinya constantly has to check that the vat has everything it needs.
存在ですね。だからお家とご飯と栄養補助食品、サプリを用意してあげて、そこにインディゴと発酵菌を入れて混ぜてあげると液が出来上がる。
Every morning he samples each vat and logs its progress.
子供の成長記録みたいなもんで、こう毎日同じようにして取った色をこう貼っていって、こう色の変化だったりとか。
The first step to raising an indigo dye vat is creating the perfect home for fermentation.
これ何かわかりますか？ちょっと当ててみてください。
これは何かの、
はい、
何かの灰です。
あ、そうですそうです。これ木灰なんですよ。木の灰。
木の灰。
Wood ash is mixed with water. When the ash settles, it leaves behind highly alkaline liquid.
アルカリが強い環境じゃないと生きていけない菌になるので、これがこの子たちのお家になります。
They also need food, wheat bran in this case. Seashell ash acts as a supplement, providing minerals and more alkalinity to the solution.
だから期間でいうと大体最初2ヶ月ぐらいは人間でいう20代ぐらいまでなんでバーンと濃い色になっていくんですけど、そこからはゆっくりこう老化が始まってこう薄い色になっていくっていう感じになります。
Kenta and his employees work overtime to keep Watanabe's running in a shrunken industry. Tokushima Prefecture, where Kamita is located, grows 70% of Japan's natural indigo. But that's only about 42 acres of indigo fields in total. At the industry's peak in the early 1900s, Tokushima was home to 37,000 acres. The decline was all thanks to synthetic indigo. Natural and synthetic indigo molecules are identical. And it's the only molecule that produces the specific blue hue genes are known for.
今日は暑くて履いてないけどデニムとかも自分らで作ってます。
Synthetic indigo replaced natural indigo for a simple reason. It's cheap. Synthetic indigo costs around $3 per pound. Natural indigo runs about $54 per pound. Part of that price gap has to do with supply. Manufacturing the world's denim consumes about 55,000 tons of synthetic indigo annually. Compare that to natural indigo. Only a few hundred tons are produced each year. Watanabe sells its largest dye kit for over $1,000. It comes with almost 8 pounds of Tsukumo, plus all the ingredients for a healthy dye and a 20-gallon plastic vat.
それに対してやっぱり販売してる値段とは全然労力が見合わない。
On top of costing more, natural dye is often less potent. But the synthetic version has its downsides too. Preparing synthetic indigo for dyeing requires a slew of toxic chemicals like aniline, formaldehyde, and hydrogen cyanide. These chemicals pose a health risk to textile workers and pollute the water used in the dyeing process. According to a 2023 study, each year about 1.84 billion tons of wastewater from the textile industry are disposed of without proper treatment. Watanabe's pours its wastewater back into its fields to fertilize the next crop. And Kenta says his solution is safe to stick your hands into. But scaling up natural indigo production could prove difficult. As much as 10 million acres of land would be needed to produce enough natural indigo to serve the fashion industry, according to some estimates. To put that number into perspective, that's about the same amount of land dedicated to growing cotton in the US. Some experts are skeptical growing that much indigo is even possible. Watanabe's works with 2.5 acres. In March, Kenta sows the seeds from last year's harvest. He transplants the seedlings to the fields by May. Between May and July, workers maintain the crop, weeding by hand, machine, and goat.
彼女はうちの除草の隊長で、畑の周りの草を一緒に食べてくれる。
Kenta founded Watanabe's in 2018. Before that, he studied for 3 years with a local indigo master.
そうですね、最初この町に来た時は地域おこし協力隊っていう国の施策の一環で、ちょうどこの上板町がすくもの生産量日本一の場所なので、そこの後継者の育成だったり、この愛の PR っていう目的で若い担い手を募集していたのに応募して、でこの町に来て、でその地域おこし協力隊に着任したんですけど。
There are only a handful of Tsukumo masters in Tokushima today.
やってる中で、すくもを作ったり染色液を作ったりってするのも、発酵っていう文化、発酵っていう技術を使ってはいるんですけど、そこもやっぱ目に見えないものと相対して、そこから恵みをいただいていて。
For Kenta, innovation is a necessary part of keeping the tradition of Tsukumo alive. He hopes to eventually increase his farm to 7.5 acres.
やはり生産量を増やすためには生産の効率化は必要ですので、ここをやっぱ毎年ではありますけど挑戦して。
Sorting and drying the leaves is one area where Kenta is trying to improve efficiency. When working by hand, workers must separate the stems from the leaves, since the leaves are the only part of the plant that contains the dye compound.
新しい機械導入してるんで、茎も一緒に粉砕されるんですよ。でその粉砕された茎も今一緒に乾かしてて、で乾かした状態から茎と葉っぱを分ける方法と、さっきみたいに映像を撮ってくださったやつみたいに。
Trying out new machines like this is part of Kenta's effort to reduce the amount of labor needed in the hopes of scaling production.
そうですね、やっぱ今の現実的なその栽培の方法だったり生産体制っていうのがもう現代には合っていない形にどうしてもなってきているので、このまま進んでいったらどんどん縮小していく一方。
After a year of careful production, the Tsukumo is ready to be used. Because it's made from natural ingredients, this dye will have impurities and inconsistencies that synthetic dyes don't. Most see that as a feature.
やっぱり色が綺麗ですね。そんな化学染料で染めたのとは。
Colors also vary from vat to vat.
濃い色を染めたかったら、若い元気な液でバーンと色を上げてもらうんですけど、薄い色がいいってなったら、若い液だと薄い綺麗な色は出せないので、ベテランのおじいちゃんの液使ってもらったり。だから僕らは液を管理しながら、生き物なんで若い期間を長くすることは管理でできるんですけど、若返らすことは
液が思っていたより冷たいですね。
だいたい今25度ぐらい。 まああったかくしすぎてもダメだし。
Since each vat is a living ecosystem, Shinya says it's necessary to avoid overworking the dye.
面白いんですよ。働かせすぎで若い時に無理させると
はい。
老化早いんですよ。
あ、そうですか。
はいし、働かせないと、例えば作ったけどあんまり染めないとかってなってくると、怠け者になってちょっと染めただけでバンって色下がるんですよ。だから本当に人間と一緒なんで、
そうなんですね。
はい、多少は、まあ、厳しく、でも厳しすぎないように愛情込めて育ててあげると長い期間綺麗な色出してくれるっていう感じになります。
Vats are productive for about 8 months.
でだんだんこう1ヶ月経ち2ヶ月経ちって日数過ぎていくと発酵菌も人間みたいに年を取っていくので薄くなっていきます。
Kenta's goal for the future of his workshop isn't to replace synthetic indigo in the fashion industry, but to teach as many people as possible about the art of Tsukumo.
やっぱりそのすくもとか材料とかを持って、ワールドツアーしたいなとか、いろんなところを車に乗っけて駅を持って回りながら体験しましょうよっていう、そういう試みもしてみたいし。
Hosting workshops at places like the Grand Front Osaka Mall exposes the art to people who may not learn about Tsukumo otherwise. It's still uncertain whether scaling up natural indigo production could solve the fashion industry's issues with denim. But Kenta believes Tsukumo is worth saving regardless.
やっぱりいかに愛の畑をどれだけ増やして、でなんか色の美しさ伝えて、この素晴らしい文化を少しでも長く未来につなげたいなっていうことをすごく思っているので、そういうことばっかり考えてます。